There was a young boy named Marcus. From an early age, he had an insatiable thirst for knowledge. His room was filled with books about history, science, art, and stories of people who made a difference in the world. He loved school and loved learning. He dreamed of one day becoming a doctor or an engineer, someone who could use his education to help others. But Marcus's dreams weren't just about personal success. He wanted to help his family, his community, and people who didn't have the same opportunities he did. Marcus grew up in a small neighborhood where resources were limited. The schools in his area weren't the best. Many of his friends had to drop out early or struggled to keep up because they didn't get the support they needed. But Marcus was determined to be different. He was a star student, always finishing assignments early, asking questions and working hard to learn as much as possible. He knew that education was the key to unlocking a better life for himself. It wasn't just about grades for Marcus. It was about proving that, no matter where you came from, you could achieve great things. He dreamed of getting into a prestigious school, one where he could push himself further, surrounded by people who shared his passion for learning. His father, a hardworking man who had always encouraged him to reach for the stars, supported this dream. He always told Marcus, "With a good education, you can be anything you want to be." Marcus had big dreams, and he was determined to make them come true. But little did he know, his journey would be full of challenges that would test both his resolve and his belief in the system. Marcus had worked so hard. Every night, he would stay up late, studying and making sure his homework was perfect. He knew that getting into a good school was his way out. He dreamed of a better life, one where he could use his talents and education to help others. His grades were excellent, his teachers praised his work, and his dedication was undeniable. The time had come for him to apply to one of the best schools in the area, a school known for its academic excellence and impressive resources. The day the application deadline came, Marcus felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had worked so hard, and he thought he had a real shot. His father, though he had his own worries, was incredibly supportive. "This is your time, Marcus," he said. "Just keep being you, and you'll make it." Weeks later, Marcus received the letter. His hands trembled as he opened it, hoping for the best. But as he read the words on the page, his heart sank. It was a rejection letter. His application had been denied. It didn't make sense. How could someone as dedicated as Marcus be turned away? He couldn't believe it. How could the system be so unfair? Marcus had worked harder than most. He had the grades, the passion, and the ambition. Yet somehow, that didn't seem to matter. It felt as if the system was stacked against him from the start, not because of his abilities, but because of who he was. The rejection wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a message. A message that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how much he deserved it, there were barriers that people like him couldn't easily overcome. Marcus felt defeated, but he didn't want to give up. He couldn't give up. He had a dream, and one rejection wasn't going to take that away. As he sat on his bed that night, staring at the letter, Marcus realized something. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been overlooked or rejected because of the color of their skin or their background. When Marcus told his father about the rejection, the room seemed to grow quiet. His father, Mr. Johnson, had always been a strong figure in his life, someone who worked long hours, did whatever it took to provide for their family, and always encouraged Marcus to chase his dreams. He'd faced his own share of struggles in life, and understood how the world often worked against people like them. Mr. Johnson listened carefully as Marcus shared his disappointment. His son's voice cracked a little as he spoke, his anger mixing with confusion. "How could they do this to me, Dad? I worked so hard, I did everything right." His father didn't interrupt. He knew how much this meant to Marcus. After a long pause, he spoke. "I know it's tough, son. I can see how much you wanted this. But sometimes the world isn't fair. You can't control everything. What you can control is how you react." Marcus looked at him, confused. "What does that mean, Dad?" Mr. Johnson sighed, leaning back in his chair. He had lived through his own battles, growing up in a world that never seemed to give him a chance. He knew the feeling of being passed over, being ignored, simply because of who you were. But he had also learned something important. how to rise above it. "Son," he said, his voice steady, "I've been where you are. You've got dreams, and no one can take those from you. But you've got to be ready for the setbacks. They're part of life. What matters is how you handle them. You're not going to give up. You're going to fight for what you want, even if it's hard." Marcus thought about his father's words. It wasn't the answer he had wanted, but it was the one he needed. His father didn't offer false promises. He didn't sugarcoat things. He spoke the truth, and Marcus respected that. "Maybe this is a sign that it's time to do something different," Mr. Johnson added, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe it's time we make sure kids like you, like us, never get turned away again." Those words lingered in Marcus's mind long after the conversation ended. They were simple, yet profound. His father had a plan. And Marcus knew that whatever that plan was, it would be something that would change everything. The idea came to Mr. Johnson one evening after Marcus went to bed. He had been turning the situation over in his mind, replaying the rejection over and over. But the more he thought about it, the more a simple thought kept rising to the surface. What if they didn't have to rely on the same system? What if they could build something better? It wasn't a new thought. For years, Mr. Johnson had been frustrated by the educational system. He had seen his own friends struggle, watched students with bright futures get left behind because the system didn't understand them. He'd always believed that the problem wasn't with the students. It was with the schools. The schools that didn't make room for everyone. The schools that turned kids away simply because they didn't fit a narrow mold. The more Mr. Johnson thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't sit back and do nothing. If they wanted real change, if they wanted something that could make a lasting impact, they would have to create it themselves. And so the idea to build a school wasn't just a dream. It became a plan. The next morning, Mr. Johnson called Marcus into the living room. There was a serious tone in his voice, but Marcus could see the spark in his father's eyes. "I've been thinking," his father began, "about what happened with that school, and I believe the only way to make sure no one like you gets rejected again is to build our own school. A better one." Marcus stared at him, his eyes wide. At first it felt like an impossible idea. Build a school? How? But his father's confidence was contagious. "I've been looking into it," Mr. Johnson continued. "It's going to be a lot of work, son. It's going to take time, resources, and a whole lot of people to help. But I know we can do it. I'm not just talking about you, Marcus. I'm talking about every kid who has the same dream you do, but doesn't have the same chance." Marcus didn't know what to say. Part of him felt overwhelmed by the idea, but another part of him felt something else: hope. The possibility of something new, something that could change everything, was right in front of them. His father explained the next steps: finding a location, gathering funds, and reaching out to the community. It wasn't going to be easy, but Mr. Johnson had always taught him one thing: if you want something bad enough, you'll find a way to make it happen. "We'll need help, Marcus. I can't do this alone. We'll talk to the people in our community, and we'll get them involved. Together, we can create a school that doesn't judge kids by their background, but by their potential." Marcus was silent for a long time. It was a huge challenge, but he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about changing the system, about giving every kid a chance. "I'm in," Marcus said finally. "Let's do it." And just like that, the plan began. The idea of building a school was big, and the reality of it was even bigger. Mr. Johnson knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined. The first step was figuring out how to make it happen, how to get the resources, the land, the support. He knew that they couldn't just go to the bank and ask for a loan. It wasn't that simple. The first hurdle was finding a location. They needed land, but the area where they lived was expensive, and there weren't many places available. Mr. Johnson spent days looking at possible sites, talking to real estate agents, and driving around the neighborhood. Nothing seemed right. Either the land was too small, too far out of the way, or it was too expensive for them to afford. Marcus could see the frustration building on his father's face. But his father didn't give up. "We'll find the right spot. I know we will," he would say every time Marcus asked what their next step was. Then there was the issue of money. Building a school wasn't cheap, even with the best intentions, they couldn't do it on their own. They needed donations, fundraisers, grants, anything they could get their hands on. Mr. Johnson reached out to local businesses, friends, and even strangers who had the means to help. But the response was slow at first. People were skeptical. Who were they to try and build a school? What made them think they could change the system? It wasn't until they held a community meeting that things started to shift. Mr. Johnson explained their vision to a small group of neighbors, people who had seen the same struggles, the same lack of opportunity. "This is for our children. This is for our future," he said. "We can't keep waiting for someone else to fix things. It's on us to create the change we want to see." The community responded. They understood what was at stake. Slowly but surely, people began to donate what they could. Some offered money, others donated their time and skills. One neighbor, a retired architect, even volunteered to help design the building. But the challenges didn't stop there. The local government wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea. They didn't make it easy for Mr. Johnson to get the necessary permits and approvals. There were zoning laws, regulations, and roadblocks at every turn. At one point, it seemed like the whole project might fall apart. The permits were delayed. The school board seemed uninterested. It felt like they were fighting against an entire system that didn't want to change. Marcus could see how hard his father was working. He would come home late at night, his eyes tired but his resolve stronger than ever. "We'll get through this, Marcus," his father would say, even when things felt impossible. "It's just another obstacle. We'll find a way around it." Despite the constant setbacks, they kept pushing forward. Mr. Johnson rallied more people from the community to help. They organized fundraising events, started online campaigns, and connected with people who had the resources to make a difference. Slowly but surely, the money began to come in. The community started to believe in what they were doing. Even when things seemed impossible, even when the road ahead looked uncertain, Marcus saw something incredible happening. People were coming together. They were building something that was bigger than just a school. It was a symbol of hope, a sign that they could take control of their futures and create something better, something that wasn't just handed to them by a broken system. Through every challenge, the Johnsons didn't back down. They kept going. As the money and resources started to come together, the dream began to take shape. The community had rallied around Mr. Johnson's idea, and now the real work had begun. They had secured a piece of land in a central location, one that would make the school accessible to as many kids as possible. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Marcus watched in awe as the construction phase started. The site, once just an empty lot, was slowly transformed. Trucks filled with materials arrived every day, and workers, many from the neighborhood, began to dig, build, and create. Mr. Johnson had hired a contractor to manage the project, but many of the workers were volunteers, people who believed in what they were doing and wanted to be a part of it. The construction site was filled with activity. Every day, Marcus would visit the site after school, watching as walls went up, the foundations solidified, and the framework for classrooms and hallways began to emerge. It was a mix of chaos and order, of hard work and determination. The noise of hammers, drills, and bulldozers became a constant background to the vision they were all building. For Marcus, it was a powerful experience. He had always dreamed of attending a school like this, but now he was seeing it come to life. It wasn't just a school, it was a symbol. It was proof that when people come together with a common goal, no obstacle is too big. And it wasn't just his father's vision anymore. It had become the community's vision. Even though there were still challenges, delays, weather problems, and supply shortages, the construction kept moving forward. The building began to take shape, with classrooms, offices, a library, and even a gym. The plan was to make this school not only a place for learning, but a place for children to grow in every way. Marcus often found himself sitting on a nearby bench, just watching the progress. His father worked tirelessly, overseeing every detail and making sure the project stayed on track. The sweat, the effort, and the long hours were starting to pay off. It was becoming more real with each passing day. "It's happening, Dad," Marcus said one evening, as he looked at the almost finished structure. "It's really happening." Mr. Johnson smiled, a mix of exhaustion and pride in his eyes. "Yeah, son, it's happening." The long-awaited day had arrived. The community-built school was finally opening. Excitement filled the air as parents, children, and teachers gathered. Mr. Johnson, standing beside Marcus, felt the weight of his journey, the hard work, the struggles, the triumph. When the ribbon was cut, cheers erupted. This was more than a school, it was a victory, a promise of opportunity for every child. Marcus walked the halls, proud. This place wasn't just for learning, it was for believing. Looking out at the playground, he knew this was only the beginning.